Welcome to the Tudor Dixon podcast. I'm Tudor Dixon, and today I am joined by Dr. Miles Yu. He is a former advisor to Secretary Mike Pompeo, and he's largely credited for the Trump administration's broad pushback against China. He is now a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, where he directs the China Center and is a professor of East Asia and military history in the United States Naval Academy. As the threat of China grows, and it is a significant threat, you guys have heard me talk about it several times, but it is growing each and every day, and the diplomatic tensions are rising in Washington and beyond. Honestly, this is the best guy to talk to. He understands it in and out. He's been involved in policy for years. Actually, someone who came over to the United States from China. So I'm really excited to have this conversation. Dr. Miles Yu, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Tudor, for having me.
Absolutely. I think we were talking ahead of time, and I think a lot of people today say, how big of a threat is China? But you have to remember that in the United States, most of the people in the U.S. haven't seen war. We don't really understand how dangerous it is. We're pretty spoiled in the fact that we think that we're safe over here in North America. But you would say that China is getting closer and closer to trying to go to war in some way, right?
Yeah, I think the China threat obviously is a very, we use words like existential, fundamental threat to the United States. Most people don't know exactly what it means. Let me just put it this way. This is not a kind of a peaceful, harmonious competition where if you win the race and the loser say, okay, you win. No, China, under Chinese Communist Party, would never accept a defeat because the win for America means the destruction of the regime. That's how they think about this, right? Whether true or not, that's how the Chinese Communist Party thinks. So their strategic goal is not just to win the race, but also the destruction of the United States, because they believe that what the United States stands for, universal values, democracy, freedom, all the things were fundamental threats to the regime. That's because they fear most. What they fear most is that the Chinese people would identify with what America is. So not necessarily about policy of one particular administration, either Republican or Democrats. So that's besides the issue. So that's why the Chinese strategic intention is based upon the idea that America must be defeated.
So when you say defeated and you say things like win the race, what does that exactly mean? What is the ultimate plan? We always talk about China has really 100-year plan and they're deep into that plan. We look at things in 4 and 8 year cycles. What does it mean for China to win the race? Is it a financial race? Is it a manufacturing race? Is it ultimately becoming the world superpower?
The most deadly threat to the Chinese Communist Party is the inspirational value of the United States. So imagine that every Chinese citizen wants to be treated like an American citizen, where you can say a lot of things, you can do a lot of things, you can criticize the president without any severe punishment, and the regime will be finished. So that's why they tie very closely, intrinsically, the sort of exemplary power of the United States, also known as soft power, with the regime's survival. That's why from day one, they can either put out a lot of disinformation about the nature and weakness and defects of the American democracy, which they've been doing from day one for decades. They try to to portray America as the absolutely abysmal hell of the world. Or if they're capable, they would basically demolish Americans' leadership role, along with it, the inspirational power, soft power of the United States. So what they mean is that they want to reduce America to a country that would have no impact in other countries. Keep in mind, there is a wave of democratization since America became a superpower of the world after World War II. You look at Asia. Since the mid-1980s, the United States has been the major factor that basically made many countries that were otherwise dictatorship democracy, like the Philippines, started with 1986 Philippine People's Power Movement. And then this kind of a unstoppable democratization wave swept Taiwan, swept South Korea, and Malaysia, Indonesia. So Chinese Communist Party is profoundly afraid of this kind of change to its own regime. So that's why their strategic intention is a zero-sum game. Now, President Biden defines the U.S.-China relationship as one of competition, strategic competition. Competition is a very nice word to say. It's not really exactly accurate because from Chinese Communist Party's point of view, the U.S.-China relationship is a matter of fundamental struggle of life and death. It's either you die, I live, or the otherwise. So this is why their strategic intention is to destroy the foundation of American democracy. So that's one thing. Now, there are a lot of bad countries, bad regimes in the world who do not wish American well. So China is not alone in that
I think
category.
that's actually something that is scary. As we see President Xi meeting with President Putin, as we see there is potentially some sort of discussions with Iran, there is the opportunity for these powers to join forces and come against the United States. But it seems as though Americans are not really aware of this. And I think that maybe what you're saying that is, if you are a Chinese citizen, you are not really seeing America with the streets paved with gold and opportunity. They're only showing you what they want you to see of America. And America is a bad place. It doesn't matter if we take America down. And then you have a Chinese military that is trained and ready to go. You also have them communicating with these other forces that could come against us. What does that mean when we see them suddenly aligning with Cuba? We already know that we had the Cuban Missile Crisis that was averted at one point, but now we can never have Cuba happen again. But it looks like that could happen.
Well, you actually talked about something that I was going to say. That is, China is not alone in the world that hates America. What really makes a difference is that China has growing capabilities that could really reach its goal. The Chinese spend a lot of money on its military, on the new platforms of modern warfare, space, cyber, undersea, artificial intelligence, electronic, magnetic pulse, and big data. So that's one thing. So in terms of capabilities, China is growing scary. That's why we see China's threat is real. Now, you mentioned about Cuba. Now, Cuba has been hosting China for intelligence and military training purposes for the last 20 years. And our leadership, Democrat and Republican, have been sort of dormant and indolent on this. The reason why that's very, since we knew this as early as at least 2001, I wrote about this, right? So this is the reason why this Cuban Chinese connection is important, because China does not view America's hegemony, that's the term they use, as purely regional. So it's not just the United States has really the capability to stop China from invading Taiwan in the Asia Pacific region. China views the United States as a global power. So therefore, in order to defeat America, you have to approach this from global perspective. That's why Cuba is important, because if you can use Cuba as a spying, listening base, you can tap into Americans' global military capabilities, how America conduct global warfare and to keep peace and save for democracy. That's because if you look at this geography, Florida is right across Cuba. 3 out of the 10 U.S. military combatant commands are in Florida. You have the CENTCOM, which basically operates global strike capability to focus on the Middle East. That's in Tampa. And then there's also in Tampa is the American Special Operations Command. That is global in nature. And you have also SOUTHCOM, which is based somewhere near Miami. So in other words, our space assets are also predominantly in Florida. So China think about this as from a global perspective. That's why it's very important. China has been developing global strike capabilities for a number of years, and they're doing something that we should really pay close attention to. There are space weapons, for example. There are cyber operations. Those are all very, very real. So it's not just I'm talking about some countries that just hate America because they don't like us. So they can actually do damage to the foundation of American Republic.
I think people think, okay, but Cuba is still far away. What does it mean to actually be spying from Cuba? For those of us who are just regular civilians, we don't see what that means. I mean, in my head, it's like that old movie where they have the binoculars, but that's not happening. That's not what happened with the spy balloon. Can you explain to the average American what it means to be this close, what it means to have a balloon travel across the country, what it means to be in Cuba?
So that's a very good segue to the third element of what I consider why China is a serious national security threat to America, to Americans' way of life. Right. That is, unlike the Soviet Union, where the Soviet bloc was completely cut off from a global free trade system. So the Soviet system could never benefit from the free market, for example. China is totally different. China is a full member of international free market system, even though nobody recognizes China as a free market economy. So China, for example, has dominated some key economic sectors and trade sectors. You go to Walmart, you go to Target, right? It's all things. It's hard for you to find items that are not made in China.
I mean, we made that happen, really.
That's right. That's exactly. That's our own stupidity and our own policy indolence. We harbor some kind of very unrealistic illusion about the nature of the Chinese Communist regime. So when we talk about, for example, China has increasingly powerful dominance in social media, right? In telecommunication. I mean, TikTok has become the most favored social media outlet for the young people in America. So why that's very important? Because if you go to China, you ask 10 people uh, uh, who are the Uyghurs, the Muslims, right? And then 9 out of 10 people will tell you they're terrorists, because as you mentioned earlier, they receive information only from the government sanctioned channel. That's right. That's why, because they don't have any comparative reference points. So that's why it's very important. Imagine TikTok become the number one social media outlet in America, which is very close, very real. I read some statistics about 2/3 of American youth actually use TikTok. Now, the Chinese government has total control, total access to TikTok as a consumer data and the servers. So by definition, by law, any company based in China must comply with Chinese government state's demands. In other words, you have to cooperate with China for espionage, for intelligence, any other purposes. So imagine someday TikTok dominates American social media platform, and the American young people were asked, do you think the American democracy is better than China's so-called democracy? I think the Chinese government might want to hear 9 out of 10 people say, no, the Chinese democracy, quote unquote, is better than Americans. That's what they do. They try to reach that kind of political. So it's one unique feature of the Chinese government is that Chinese government weaponize every aspect of the comprehensive engagement between U.S. and China. So, because as I say, this is to them, this is the epic battle of life and death.
Yeah. Well, you brought up the Uyghurs. A lot of people don't know what group that is in China. There's really, truly a genocide against this group. They are the Chinese Muslims. But can you give a little insight as to what they're doing to those folks and why they are manipulating people into believing that they're a bad group?
So the Uyghurs was a very small ethnic minority group. They're not Han Chinese by ethnicity. They were kind of Turkic, people in Central Asia for centuries. And China basically conquered the Chinese Central Asia, which that's where the Uyghur lived. Chinese called the Xinjiang, right, which literally means a new frontier or new territory.
Hmm.
Uh, so the Uyghurs were about 10 to 12 million, very small in comparison to the Chinese, the size of a population. However, they are ethnically different. They have unique ethnic identity, and most importantly, they're Muslims.
Hmm.
So, and the Chinese Communist ideology actually harbors ideological hostility to all form of religions, particularly organized religions like Christianity and Muslim. So they try to sort of, to wipe out the Uyghurs' ethnic and religious identity for decades, and couldn't succeed totally. So, and then about 20 years ago, China had this idea of we're going to open up the western frontier. We're going to have a breakout points against the Americans' so-called containment. That's all in their imagination. So they look at the Xinjiang. That's where we're going to go. That's basically the beginning of the so-called the Belt and Road Initiative, because the Belt and Road Initiative started
Yeah.
as a sort of a network that starts from Xinjiang. That's why they want to have a total pacification plan campaign in that area, and they intensify the effort to subjugate the Uyghurs. That's how they. That's why they locked up the Uyghurs into concentration camp by the millions. Since 2018 or 2019, that time frame. And the U.S. government officially designated China's atrocity against Uyghurs as a genocide. And that definition, that determination has not been overturned by any evidential counter arguments. So it's pretty horrific. So that's why, yet in the eyes of ordinary Chinese, all Uyghurs are terrorists. If you're a Uyghur ethnic minority, no matter how innocent you are, you cannot really check into a hotel or buy tickets, train tickets or airplane, because you are under complete surveillance and you are deemed by default as a terrorist. That's basically, that's systemic discrimination. So it's pretty horrible. I mean, Uyghurs are not alone. You can talk about Tibetans and many other religious practitioners in China as well.
But if that's what they do when they take over a country, if that's how people are treated, how do people expect the Taiwanese to be treated when they go in there? When they start to take over more and more territories? I mean, this is truly a danger that people will be taken in as slaves and abused and ultimately killed. And I think that's something that the average American doesn't really understand. And we talk about Taiwan. Taiwan is really, I mean, they're obviously watching, they're getting buzzed by Chinese military planes constantly. It seems as though China has been watching the conflict in Ukraine and saying, okay, how is the rest of the world going to react? Because we're about to do this with Taiwan. And what does that mean once they go into Taiwan?
Well, it could mean many things. You mentioned about Ukraine, which is very important because Russia's gambit in Ukraine has brought Russia closer to China. These two very powerful nuclear powers are doing their bit of aggression, following exactly the logic of aggression, because Vladimir Putin invades Ukraine based upon the pretext that the Ukrainians do not have their own ethnic identity, do not have their own nationhood. So all that matters to Vladimir Putin is a shared historic, linguistic, ethnic heritage, which Ukrainians and Russians do. But since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Ukrainians have developed their own ethnic identity, their sovereignty. So Vladimir Putin denies that. Chinese Communist Party is doing exactly the same thing to the Taiwanese. It denies Taiwanese their own political and intellectual and cultural identity, and just focus on the shared linguistic ethnic heritage. If that's the case, United States should belong to England. So this is just ludicrous. But the two powers are in cahoots together to do their own business of aggression and territorial aggrandizement. On the other hand, Russia is not doing very well, isn't it? In Ukraine. Right. So on one hand, China's strategic confidence to venture into Taiwan has increased. Simultaneously, on the other hand, the chances of winning and the cost of such a military adventure has also increased dramatically. So imagine if China launched a military adventure against Taiwan, and it gets stuck like Russians in Ukraine, and that is going to be much more dangerous to the regime's survival than anything else. So that's why it gives a pause to the Chinese CCP decision maker. I would say the most important factor to deter China from venture into something very dangerous and the military hot war is the absolute and clear display of resolve of the United States, because we're the country that ultimately matters. And I think both Republicans and Democrats are on this score. Actually, they're very united in this regard.
Yeah, right.
And then President Biden has said on 4 occasions that he's going to use U.S. military to intervene to fight back China's military invasion of Taiwan. That's very good, but he's not alone. I mean, every president since Carter has said that.
What do you, as you watch this conflict with Ukraine, and China is watching as well, do you think that the United States should get more heavily involved there, or do you think that the trajectory we're on is the right trajectory?
The Ukrainian war is actually a very tricky situation for the United States because since I worked in the Trump administration, I knew that we actually made a revolutionary change of Americans' global security posture. That is, we shifted Americans' strategic focus away from Europe, from the Middle East, to focus on China in the Indo-Pacific, for precisely the reason that I mentioned earlier, that China is a far more formidable foe of the United States than the Soviets, than the loosely organized state-sponsored terrorists in the Middle East. On the other hand, the war in Ukraine also calls for Americans' increased involvement to ensure Russia's defeat. So the balance, the trick is that we can support Ukraine, ensure Ukrainians' victory, without changing American strategic focus away from China to Europe. So that's why it's very important for the Americans to call on our friends and allies, NATO allies in Europe, to increase the burden sharing responsibilities, to increase their participation in the war efforts in Ukraine. After all, it's in their backyard. And the Europeans are actually in a bit of a dilemma as well. Decades of over dependency on other countries has hollowed out the Europeans' sort of a self-reliance. For example, they suddenly realized after the war in Ukraine broke out that they have the over-reliance on Russia for energy. And also they have the over-reliance on China for trade. And then most horrifying to them is that they have the over-reliance on America for security. We're paying about 70 to 80% of the NATO bills. America will be the main preponderant forces defending NATO countries. So they.
But I think that's what the fear is right now, because people watching this on the sidelines are going, "Wait a minute, is America really secure? Everything seems a little crazy there." The president he falls asleep when he's in the middle of a press conference with the Israeli president. I mean, it looks pretty rough. So suddenly we're relying on America for security. We're not even sure they know what they're doing. European countries aren't paying their fair share. Meanwhile, we are very reliant on China. Every European country is very reliant, but the United States, I mean, we're importing 5 times what we export to them. We are very reliant on them. And I've said to experts, well, doesn't that put China in an interesting position too? Because most of what they're selling, we're buying. And they said, you got to understand, dealing with a regime like that, a communist regime, that's not how they're thinking of it. They don't care.
Yeah, I mean, China, as I say, weaponized every aspect of U.S.-China relations to seek its own geopolitical purpose, which is ultimately the destruction of America as a world leader. So trade, obviously, you're right. Trade is a huge leverage for China. They use trade to gain more control of American market, to get more control of America's political arena. I mean, in your state of Michigan, for example, there is a Chinese state subsidized, state sponsored battery company, which recently your governor. I have no idea what she's drinking, what she's thinking. Allow and facilitate this kind of facility in Michigan. It's very dangerous because battery controls the future of electric vehicles, and Detroit is the center of American automobile manufacturing. We must develop self-reliance on that. So this is very important. Just imagine this: China's stronghold on us is such that if you are an actor, if you're a director from Hollywood, or if you're a sports manager for some team, if you tweet on your private account something that Chinese Communist Party doesn't like, and then no soup for you. Your business out of China will be totally cut off, and that's why they basically has cowered the Americans, sort of business elites, to comply with China's demands. That's not American. That's fundamentally un-American. So that's why China's control, China's influence, China's threat to the United States is not 6,000 miles away somewhere in China. It's right next to us. It's on your computer. It's in your iPhone. China's surveillance and eavesdropping capabilities is so pervasive in the United States that we have reached the point of national crisis. That's why you see the congressional hearings, the technical experts, government policies have been sort of all acting, trying to find a solution. It's very important. It's very important for us to understand that because the nature of American political system, which is a sort of federalist society, that is, we have a very strong local and state autonomy. So China just pounced in and exploiting that nature of American political system by massively engage with local and state governments to their own bidding. They even tried to battery in Michigan, for example. That's a very, very bad thing.
That's what, yeah. So I want to talk about that because there's actually two. We have the one that Ford is bringing in that Governor Youngkin said, don't you dare bring that to my state. I'm not going to have a company that is connected to the Chinese Communist Party. We have the other one named Goshen that's coming into the middle of the state. Neither of these were required to have any type of environmental testing, which to me is just shocking because these are using very, very intense chemicals on our farmland, right in the middle by our water. In the state of Michigan, we're surrounded by the Great Lakes, one of the greatest freshwater natural resources in the entire world. Do we want China to have A, access to our water, B, the ability to pollute our water, or C, just the intelligence opportunity in the center of the country, in the state of Michigan? And also, we ultimately don't even know what this one battery plant is making because they're calling it a battery plant, but there's non-disclosure agreements signed around it. We're hearing that the product will likely be shipped out of the country. We won't even use it here. How could we possibly get in bed with these companies?
Well, I don't know. It's up to Michigan voters to figure out. But I will say, all I have to say is I have a large I married into the family that's based in Michigan, and you're right. Michigan has a lot of beauty, and pure Michigan will no longer be pure if Chinese Communist Party controls the major sector of your economy. That's all I have to say. But I also believe that federal, state, and local government must work together, like what we did in the old days of Cold War, to face the reality of China's pervasive influence in America, and with the incredibly un-American conditions, right? So that's why we have to be, we cannot really deal with China purely from a transactional, managerial, or business perspective. We must deal this with in mind every minute what China is up to.
But it seems as though we're playing footsie with China because we've got Secretary of State Blinken going over there waiting to be called in. Let me just see if the president's going to see me. I'll just wait at his beck and call. That looks pretty weak. You've got John Kerry over there saying, oh, we think that they're going to do something on climate. They haven't done anything on climate. In fact, they're commissioning new coal plants twice a week right now. I mean, they are increasing their energy their ability to produce energy at a crazy rate. And it seems as though that has something to do with not only manufacturing, but power, because it takes a lot of energy to make military equipment. So why does the Biden administration continue to play footsie with China?
I think they still harbor the illusion that China is going to be cooperative with the United States if we were nicer to them. I mean, this is a policy of appeasement. I mean, you cannot appeasement policy is based on the philosophy that if you're nicer to a bully will stop being a bully. That failed in 1930s, right? We know that for a fact, and the world as a result pay a big price for it. Now, I'm not saying that that the Biden team is completely sort of carrying out the policy of appeasement, but I do know that. They try to prevent a shooting war, and that's why Blinken went to China, which I think is right move. Right, he will go there, but you also have to really understand that at this point of the game, China needs the United States much more than United States needs China. Having said all that, we have to say how China is strong and active in penetrating the American market, because Chinese economy, China's military are heavily dependent upon Western technologies, and I think both the Biden team and the Trump team are doing an okay job, right, in export control to stop the sensitive technology from going to China. But I think we should really be negotiate with China with strength and pay attention to optics. And United States of America should not look pathetic to the rest of the world for many reasons, sort of by default or by our own action. United States is a country of consequence in world peace and global security. So we should not think very shabby of ourselves. And the idea that America is in decline is total nonsense. As an immigrant, I know America has an incredible bright future. The only thing that can defeat America is ourselves. Losing our belief in our own strength and our advantages. Listen, there are millions and millions of Chinese aspiring to come to the United States to be free. And you ask me, how many of the Americans really try to go to China to be their citizen, to be enslaved? The idea that America is a country of systemic racism, is a country of all kinds of mortal, morbid sort of pathology is absolutely absurd. So we should restore confidence in ourselves, like what President Reagan did in the 1980s.
I like your attitude there. I think that's so important. It's something that we try to tell people all the time. We're very fortunate. It's something that I tell my kids all the time. We are so fortunate to live here. And I think that a lot of the younger generations out there are feeling like the sky is falling. We've been in worse situations, but we are still very strong. And it was great to have you on today. So wonderful to have this conversation, because I think it just explained a lot of the things that people hear on the news. They don't get the chance to really have that stretched out in a longer conversation. And I appreciate you. I appreciate you being here. Dr. Miles Yu, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you all for joining us on the Tudor Dixon podcast. As always, for this episode and others, go to TudorDixonPodcast.com. You can subscribe right there, or head over to the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And join us next time on the Tudor Dixon podcast. Have an awesome day.